In smartphone design, there's Apple and then there's everybody else, but I actually don't mean that in a good way. While Android manufacturers have mastered the art of new designs pretty much every year, Cupertino is like the automaker that holds on to it for 2 to 3 years, and yet what's interesting is how Apple gets away with it. You'd assume consumers would complain about the practice, but nope, it's really just us tech nerds. Apple's approach to build on that same design with new features has been kind of a staple, and yet I think that this is the first time this is not just an S year. On one corner, we have the iPhone 14 Pro Max, what Apple dubs as Pro Beyond, and what I'm going to call as its most controversial update yet. And on the other, we have the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which was maybe not the best phone of its time, but certainly my favorite iPhone in a long time. It's a rarity for me to make this comparison and not just tell you that they look the same and are different. Actually, the changes between them are both for better and for worse. I'm Jaime Rivera with Pocketnow, and let me explain to you why. So to clarify, the iPhone 13 Pro was my favorite, not really the Max given the heft, but it's pretty much the same phone and everything else. With this larger variant, I feel Apple did an amazing job at maturing the playground with a product that had lots of power, more than enough battery life, great color options, camera features, and even a smaller notch. This year might look the same from the back, but I think that even that's slightly different. Deep purple on this new variant has garnered a lot of praise, but I do miss Sierra Blue a lot. I feel this old variant handles fingerprints better, and my unit aged pretty gracefully where I still don't know what to expect from the darker tone. Both phones are massive, so forget about one-handed use, but their dimensions are slightly different. The 13 Pro Max is actually a hair taller and wider, while the 14 Pro Max is a hair thicker, though both are the same weight, which means even that isn't necessarily easy to handle. Both wobble on a table if used bare, though the newer model has a much larger camera hump. Then they each share the same ceramic shield glass and stainless steel, so durability is about as good as it gets, and then MagSafe remains something you can use as well, though it's interesting how Apple didn't make a big deal out of it this year. Now flip them around and you'll see changes, but not necessarily good ones on my book. I know a lot of you hated the notch, but I can't say that I like the dynamic island. It's lower than the notch, making it more intrusive for content, even if, sure, while providing added functionality that can be cool sometimes. I personally still don't like it, but I'll let you be the judge in the comments. I feel that if Face ID won't die, a dynamic notch would have been just as good. Now, the 14 Pro Max can get dramatically brighter in extreme conditions, but then both have gorgeous panels with fantastic color reproduction, viewing angles, and a variable refresh rate up to 120 Hz. That said, the 14 Pro Max can drop to an even lower rate, which enables one of the most controversial always-on displays in the market. I happen to love it, but I won't blame you for finding it confusing to know if your phone is on or off. From the brighter panel, now at 1000 nit bright. And then as for sound quality, I think that didn't really improve much. I feel that both phones do a great job at it. Powerful chips out there, but then the A14 Bionic. Now, a major player into how that always-on display works has to do with the upgraded internals. Apple claimed that the new A16 Bionic has a couple of extra perks to enable those levels of power efficiency, but then again, it's not like if the A15 Bionic is a slouch in any way. RAM hasn't changed in years, and the same goes for the storage options. 5G capabilities remain the same, and so does Wi-Fi, but then the 14 Pro Max has a newer version of Bluetooth. Batteries are also nearly identical, and the same goes for charging protocols and the IP rating. Now, a major advantage of going iPhone is that even if the 14 Pro Max launched with iOS 16, you could access it on the 13 Pro Max a week before that replaced it. You'll have a hard time trying to find differences between them and how they perform with it. It still isn't my favorite operating system for larger displays, with lots of controls on the top, making you do a lot of juggling and then a lot of wasted space. There's still no split window multitasking, and sadly, the status of applications doing picture-in-picture even today is limited. In its defense, this is my favorite implementation of a lock screen like ever. Apple wasn't the first, but these widgets and combinations are seriously awesome. Everything else, though, is more a bunch of nice little things you'll probably forget about. Seriously, iOS 16 feels more about just being a major change to the lock screen to mask the insignificance of the rest. If anything, what I have heard is a ton of complaints over how the 13 Pro Max got hit in the endurance department, and listen, I agree. I think that it had better battery life than the 14 Pro Max before I updated, but since I did, I will say both are pretty much the same, which is still better than others, but no longer as fantastic. Then comes the controversial change number 3, which is the full switch to eSIM on the 14 Pro Max versus the 13 Pro Max. This alone was enough of a deal breaker for me to not want to upgrade given how much I travel, but I know that's not everybody's case. And listen, don't get me wrong, the process to set it up on AT&T was seamless, and then data connectivity on both of these phones is just as fantastic. I know you've been able to use eSIMs on iPhones for years, but as of now in the United States, the lack of a regular SIM means less flexibility when you travel. So far, I know it's almost like if the 13 Pro Max is a better phone, so the last thing to defend the 14 Pro Max is the camera. This is actually the first time since the iPhone 6s that Apple moves away from 12 megapixel shooters, but then ups the ante even further by adding a sensor so large that it even makes the Galaxy S22 Ultra look small by comparison. It enables a lossless crop at 2x matched with a brighter camera in the ultra-wide, even if the telephoto didn't really change much. As for the results, well, I spent a good deal of time looking at these daylight photos, and I'll tell you, I keep double checking if I wasn't seeing the same shot twice. They are nearly identical, and where I prefer the 14 Pro Max because it has a slightly wider field of view on the primary, and then it also provides the extra kick in that 2x crop, which I prefer for street photography, but then again, I do prefer the 13 Pro Max because it triggers macro at a shorter distance. 3x then seems to be nearly the same, and also that 15x looks just as cartoony on both phones. Now, once you kick into low light, that's where you'll notice a difference. The ultra-wide falls apart less on the 14 Pro Max, though not by much, and I do notice the primary being faster and slightly more detailed. In the past, I wouldn't recommend any other focal length in the dark, but I think the 14 has taken that from bad to decent. You'll notice more processing improvements in night selfies where the 14 Pro Max just obliterates the 13 Pro Max, though once you go back to regular lighting, you'll notice differences stop being so evident, and that extends to even portraits. Tricks now include 4K cinematic video, which, even if slightly overdone the lower the light gets, is dramatically better than what we had before. Now, I can't say that I'm much of a fan of motion video for the newer models given the loss of resolution and how much more light you need, but it's not like if regular video wasn't already great at stabilization. Even in the dim scenarios I had to pull these tests off due to the weather, I think both phones performed admirably. In both primary and selfie video, though, I do notice a slight edge from the 14 Pro Max and how much extra light it can pull in. To conclude, I think this is probably the least common comparison that I've ever done. Usually it's all about me showing you the new phone and how much better it is over the previous one, but that's not necessarily the case here. The camera improvements are there, but not dramatically better. I'm in this weird case where I do prefer the notch over the dynamic island, believe it or not. Software doesn't seem any better on either, and it's not like if you'll be able to tell any sort of difference in performance. The always-on display is cool, but not something that I'd consider indispensable. I think you kind of know where I'm going. This is honestly the first time that I wish I didn't upgrade to the newer iPhone. Listen, the lack of a SIM tray alone is a huge problem for me that I'll be testing soon as I make my first trip with it abroad, and which I consider unnecessary drama as teardowns have proven this space is used by nothing. Listen, I understand how Apple wants to push the market forward, but that kind of explains why I don't like this phone. I'm not going to say that it's ahead of its time, but in typical Apple fashion, it's trying to force us to say goodbye to solutions that aren't yet a standard. Like, remember the headphone jack. To a certain degree, you'll be paying to live the curse of the early adopter, and it's mainly because of this that I feel that if you have a 13 Pro Max, you might want to wait another year to see how everybody else catches on. Now, let us know if you agree with our assessment in the comments down below, and while you're at it, follow us on social media and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. You can also follow me on my personal handles to see me miss my old phone more than I thought I would. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like what you saw. I'm Jaime Rivera. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.